মায়ের সঙ্গে যদি লোকসানের বিয়েটা হয় তাহলে ওরা তো সেই টাকার ভাগটা পাবে, তাই না? সেই জন্য ওদের কোনো অসুবিধা নেই বিয়েটা। বাড়ি ছেড়ে চলে গেছে।
তরকা করবে? সবজি কি আছে?
সুখের জন্য একটা
সবজি করো কিছু একটা। সবজি আছে বলো আমার।
Good evening. Let us start our session. Today is the last session. I want to finish with Vidarbha, which is possibly extremely important for Maharashtra because in terms of it as the most significant forest cover in Maharashtra, stretching right from Amravati to Gadchiroli. It also has 2/3 of Maharashtra's mineral resources. In terms of economic value of Vidarbha, and especially if you look at eastern Vidarbha, Chandrapur, Gondia, Bhandara, they have much of coal, limestone, manganese, and things like that. So therefore, they're very, very important. Also, if you look at western Vidarbha, it is the most significant cotton growing area in Maharashtra. It's also the site of the maximum agriculture distress. Vidarbha is often called, Western Vidarbha is often called the farmer suicide capital of India. Okay. And also, when you talk about Maharashtra, Vidarbha is the only region which has been fighting to form a separate state because it feels there's been continued neglect and they have a lot of, what should I say, supportive evidence for that. That I'll discuss in some time. Shiv Sena is the only party which will not allow for any kind of, what should I say, separation. The Congress has been ambivalent. The BJP has supported it since 1992. Therefore, that is something we need to know. But if you look at Vidarbha, in terms of West and East Vidarbha, there is a lot of changes. West Vidarbha mostly comes under what we call the Berar province. And therefore, the British forced the Nizam of Hyderabad to cede it to them because they claimed money for the kind of troops they were maintaining for him. And therefore, a lot of the Berar province came under that. They took over. Also, the Berar province is the site of the Bhosles of Nagpur. And in 1853, when Raghoji Bhosle did not have an heir, they kind of, took it inside into the East India Company territories. So for that is. If you look at Vidarbha, there is some very interesting history in terms of, I'm not sure how many people are aware of the connection of Vidarbha to the story of Shivaji. If you look at Buldhana, Jijabai was from this place in Buldhana called this Sindhkhed Raja. And the Sindhkhed Raja is a place even now. The palace of this Lakhoji Rao Jadhav, Jijabai's father, is still intact. So that's a very interesting story in terms of the connection of when you talk about a lot of Maratha history, we only look at Western Maharashtra. But an important part of it in terms of the origin of Jijabai was from Buldhana, and therefore that's for me it's very interesting. And of course, there is a massive memorial built to her there, near the place where she was born. But some part of the palace and the fort is still existing, interesting. Within Buldhana itself, that there is a city called Kamgaon, which is possibly as one of the biggest trading for silver. I've not really understood why is it so much important. A lot of silver gets traded in Kamgaon. And if you look at Akola, Akola is historically very important because in 1803, in the Anglo-Maratha War, it was the war was fought on the East India Company side by Major General Wesley, who later became the Duke of Wellington. And it is at the Battle of Aragon in 1803 where he was able to finally defeat the soldiers of the Bhosles of Nagpur and the Scindias of Gondia. And 1803 was seen as the first time where Marathas accepted the complete suzerainty of British, what is called the Treaty of Basin. But the major war, which kind of decisively shifted power away from the Marathas, was at the Battle of Aragon. And also in Akola, there is the Akola, which I find very interesting because Akola itself gets its name from Akol Singh, who possibly built the the earliest fort and settlement, and the district gets its name from him. But if you go to Akola Fort is called as Asadgarh because the fort was fortified, made stronger during the time of Aurangzeb by one of his generals called Asad Khan, and therefore it is it's interesting story. And later, when the Maratha Empire began to expand, that for some time was a part of the Maratha Empire. And of course, the Battle of Aragon was fought near this fort. Also very important is one of the extremely old temples, Shiv temple in Nathola, is supposed to be built by Rajeshwar the Chola king, which I find interesting. I'm a little skeptical, but there is some records will suggest that, which again for me is not easy to understand. How is it, which is important there. And also, if you look at Amravati, from Akola we moved to Amravati. Amravati, in terms of, has a large part of it under forest. And beyond Paratpara, if you go in Amravati, of course, there is the Nilgarh Tiger Sanctuary, and the tribals in Amravati are in Amravati in Nilgarh are Korkus, and the Korkus are a very interesting tribe because a lot of the language of the Korkus has a lot of words similar to Telugu. And that itself also, it connects with some of the words which are found among the native Australians. So therefore, this it's a very interesting. So the Korkus are what are called a very important Austro-Negroid ethnic group, and the Amravati itself has a lot in terms of the forest area. And if you go to Amravati, within the Nilgarh Tiger Reserve is Chikkaldara. And Chikkaldara is the highest hill station and the highest peak in the Vindhyas in Maharashtra comes in Chikkaldara. And so Amravati has a lot of importance, but Amravati also has large amounts, it's extremely high levels of malnutrition, especially in the Nilgarh Tiger Reserve area. So that is, which is, which we need to see. And if you look at within the Amravati, Mehelgarh Tiger Reserve, there are two forts which fall within that. One is the Narnala Fort, which is actually more in Akola. And the Narnala Fort has possibly one of the longest cannons in India. And the other fort, which is massive and which I've had opportunity of visiting twice, is called the Governgate Fort. And the Governgate Fort is again, earlier a mud fort was built by the Gandhis, and then it was, proper fort was built again in 1425. So Amravati again is, if you go to Amravati, one of the largest private institutes for physical training is in Amravati. The kind of sports, and it's a massive complex, and quite impressed by what I saw. And there are people from across India who come. I saw people from at least 3 or 4 states of Northeast India. Okay, athletes were training there, and it was a good experience. Of course, some of the details I don't remember now because I went there about 5-6 years ago. So my memory is not really very good. But Amravati is also the hometown of this place called a person called Punjab Rao Deshmukh. And also Garge Baba or Garge Maharaj, who was somebody who tried to teach a lot about cleanliness. And in Maharashtra today, as a part of earlier Nirmal Bharat Abhiyan and Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, there is a Garge Maharaj scheme which has competition to select the best village and the best city. It's a very kind of competition because it allows local communities to kind of build assets. And one of the criteria of this Garge Maharaj scheme is the involvement of the entire community. For some years it was discontinued, but then it's again been restarted. But that is something about Amravati which I thought I should just mention. And again, if you look at Wardha, Wardha has at least 3 or 4 places in Wardha are extremely interesting. There's this place called Hinganghat. And Hinganghat, there is the grave of a person called William Lambton, Sir William Lambton. He was somebody who did the trigonometrical survey. And William Lambton is interesting because there is a bust of his near St. Thomas Mount in Chennai. And there is a ridge in the Nilgiris named after him. Because his survey covered a large part from South India to Central India, he died at Hinganghat. And so that is an important thing. The other place in Wardha, which is, I hope some of you can visit, is a place called Ashti. And Ashti has such a large number of interesting monuments, graves, and mosques and things like that, which is again not very well known to a lot of people outside. But a lot of people are familiar with, of course, Sevagram. And that itself is a place where people visit. There is the, Mapu Kutir. I mean, they've maintained a lot of that in terms of the kind of model which Gandhi had in mind of a village-based development. And it's worth a visit to see this place. Also, it's interesting if you ever go to Usinelli Center at Karnala, near Karnala, they have recreated the Bapu Kutir and the Kasturba Kutir. Personally, I felt it was a massive waste of money, but they felt that Gandhi life could be an inspiration, and they recreated this at the Usinelli Center. It's not too far. Maybe you could visit the place. But Sevagram itself was an attempt of Gandhi to experiment to create self-sufficient communities. And to what extent also as a part of Freedom Struggle, a lot of important meetings and sessions, and it's a good thing to visit. The other important ashram which I enjoyed visiting is the Palmer Ashram. The Palmer is it's very close to Wardha town, and that is the ashram of Vinoba Bhave. So all his books, and it's an interesting place to visit. And Vinoba Bhave himself was, in my mind, contentious. Of course, he is important because he started the Bhudan movement, the Sampati Dan. It had, some kind of success. But Vinoba Bhave is also important because if you ever travel to Uttarakhand and go to Garhwal, not so much Kumaon, you'll find that across Garhwal, you'll find a lot of Sarvodaya institutions. And most of these institutions were set up by Vinoba Bhave. And if you go, you'll find in most of these places, and even recently Sundarlal Bahuguna died. He was a person who was connected with one of the Sarvodaya institutes of Vinoba Bhave. The other person who started the Chandi Prasad, the Chipko movement, Chandi Prasad Bhatt. He was also Sarvodaya, where he used to work with one of the Sarvodaya movement. So that's important because at the time of the 62 war, there was a lot of these communist organizations which were working among people there, and therefore many of them had affinity towards China. And there was a need to intellectually, make a challenge. And Vinoba Bhave took up the responsibilities for a lot of time, and it's worth visiting those Sarvodaya ashrams. So when you talk about Vinoba Bhave, what is the kind of legacy? Of course, a lot of people are very critical of him for a variety of reasons, especially because during the emergency, a lot of people expected, because Vinoba Bhave was a Gandhian of significant stature for a lot of people. And they hoped that he would take a stand. He would lend his hand to the kind of movement which Jayaprakash Narayan was starting. But he chose to go on a Mount Rath for those 2 years of emergency. So of course, therefore, for a lot of people found that extremely, unbecoming because the idea of Gandhi was to stand up against any kind of injustice, to fight for justice and truth. And the idea of taking Mount Rath is something which was, what should we say, many people felt it was some kind of convenient, and it was very convenient for him to do so. And of course, from Wardha, if you're moving towards Chandrapur, I'll come to Yavatmal sometime. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Barora. Barora is the place where Anandvan is there, where there are some 465 hectares. Okay. And it has, it's again a self-sustained community of people. Initially started for people suffering with leprosy. And now they have institutions which take care of people who are hearing impaired, visually challenged. And they're running a lot of, all these people are working at, small units, making anything from cots to cupboards to various kinds of things, working on looms, working with wood. So it's very interesting. The other thing which I was very impressed with Anandman was that Baba Amte felt that when a person dies, when you cremate the person, okay, he said the amount of food you use for one cremation, he said could actually could be enough for a family for a month. And therefore, there what they do is they have one space where they just bury people and plant a tree. It's only for, I think, Baba Amte and his wife, they have a kind of a small memorial. But the rest of it, I think, they felt that is very eco-friendly. So where the body becomes a part of the organic matter. And it nurtures, it nourishes a small spling. So that is something which is interesting. And it's large complex, and you know, I've had the opportunity to visit many times. One of my earliest visits was when Baba Amte is still alive. This was in the 80s, and I remember talking to him. At that time, he was also involved in the Narmada Bachao Andolon, and he could either stand or lie down because of a severe back problem. It was, you know, I mean, I have good memories of the meeting. It was, I mean, I really enjoyed talking to him at that. But with students, maybe much later, I started visiting the place. But Varora is important because it also, the important thing about him was that he not only was committed to this, but he also started, was concerned about the quality of life of the tribals, especially in Gadchiroli. And you refer, if you go to Gadchiroli, the southern part of Gadchiroli, that's where Prakash Amte, his younger son, has a school and a hospital. And in 1982, when he went there, there was not even road connecting it. And more than Prakash Amte, I have a lot of admiration for his wife, because she came from a well-to-do family, and when she says that when they went, in terms of even there was no medical help, there was nothing in terms of, you know, for when she had a young child, even to feed, it was a struggle. No electricity, and a lot of difficulty. But if you go now at this place called Himalkasa, it is, you know, the complex is very large, and I'll come to that in little time. But Varora and Chandrapur is important. Also in Varora, there are a lot of important Jain temples. And the Jains also run one of the biggest, what should I say, shelter for cows. They have bought a lot of land. So a lot of the community members are donating to ensure that, you know, cattle which are stays don't need to be killed or abandoned. So therefore, that is again, you know, an interesting experience, because to find a strong Jain community in Varora for me was a surprise. And the kind of work they were doing was definitely interesting. If you come to Chandrapur, even now, if you travel to the city of Chandrapur, you will find that, you know, parts of the city of Chandrapur has massive walls. Okay. They're really big walls. And Chandrapur was part of what was called the Gondwana, the kingdom of the Gonds. And the northern part of that kingdom was in Jabalpur, stretching up to Chhattisgarh. And the southern part of it was based in Chandrapur. And Kankia Bilal Shah was a person who built this fort. And there are interesting stories about him and various other things. But if you wish, I mean, so if it's Chandrapur, in terms of, there is not much information about the forts, about the fort which existed there. So that, you know, Chandrapur again is now a very important town, because in terms of around Chandrapur, there are 27 coal mines. And Chandrapur is called the city of black gold. So if you find that in terms of, you know, it is a very important, you know, source of huge mineral resources. And Chandrapur also is, what should I say, the site of the Tadoba Andari Tiger Reserve. And Tadoba Andari Tiger Reserve is, Tadoba was the first national park in Maharashtra. And it is an important tiger reserve. Of course, a lot of people go because they want to see the tiger. So you can only go by vehicles, which I think is extremely unfortunate. Because from the 80s till 2006, 3 or 4. I remember you could walk, you could stay inside the national park. There was a youth hostel and the guest houses near the lake. And there's a canteen. And Tadoba Tiger Reserve is one place where I walked extensively across so many points, including tribal villages. And, you know, walking through a forest is much better than just taking a safari. I've never enjoyed safaris. I would rather, but a lot of people, when they go for to a sanctuary, they want to see, you know, tiger. And the unfortunate thing is when you go on a safari, most people are not even, we don't talk about what the different things you saw. The only question when everybody comes back, they ask us, Dekha kya? Means, did you see a tiger? And everything else is irrelevant. But Vidarbha, I mean, the forests in Vidarbha, if you look at in terms of, you know, the trees of Hirda, Beheda, massive trees you find. And this, even in Amravati, I remember there was a forest ranger who gave me some, he said, this is natural Chavanprash of trees which are made, which is very strong. It was not made very palatable by, as it's Dabar and others do, but it is supposed to be extremely nourishing. But if you go to this place, you know, if you go to, if you walked into the villages of in Tadoba, okay, Tadoba itself gets a name from a tribal deity, which is actually, if you go to see the deity, is just a stump of wood where the deity resides. And around that, they have a lot of metal offerings and things like that. But if you go to any of the villages in inside the tribal villages in Chandrapur or wherever, they'll also have a lot of collections of mahua flowers and fruits. They taste like kishmish. Because in the dry season, they you know, are important source of sugar. A part of it, of course, is made by alcohol. For a lot of people, that is something, you know, the drink is, it doesn't give you a hangover, and now people are trying to develop it into, you know, into a, you know, sellable alcohol. But the mahua flower and the mahua seeds, I remember they used to kind of make it into atta flour and make chapati, which is supposed to have a lot of nutrient value, much more than wheat flour. Of course, a lot of tribals, because of the kind of you know, rations and other things are coming, are moving away from that into using processed thing. But I've seen a lot of this kind of thing. So when you go into these villages, I still remember the taste of the mahua flowers, which they can import. And also, if you go to Vidarbha, one of the most important minor forest produce is Tendupatta. Okay. The tree is called Temburni, but the leaves are used to roll BDs. You know, the income from Tendupatta in 3 or 4 districts of Gadchiroli is about 4,000 crores. It's a minor forest produce. Imagine the kind of money, 3,000 crores, that's the kind of money which is there. And if you look at the reason why, next, a lot of the people who, you know, make them roll BDs, etc., exploit them. And because there's so much of money, a lot of these, most of the forest contractors pay massive amounts of money. I remember in 1993 when I first went to Nagzira, I was told that annually they would pay 1 to 3 crores in terms of extortion money, because the Naxal never killed any of these contractors because they were a source of income. So if you look at in terms of the Tendupatta, okay, that is something which is very important. And also, if you go to Chandrapur, you must try and see whether you can visit the forest office. If you go to the forest office, there is a forest, you know, I mean, they collect a lot of wood, which they harvest. And you must ask to go to the museum. At the entrance of the museum, there is a bust of a person called Dionysus. Across India, in many places, you find the bust of dietary pandas. Those of you who are in Mumbai and you go to Sanjay Gandhi National Park, when you go into the Sanjay Gandhi National Park, after you pay the entry fee, on the left-hand side, there's an interpretation center. At the entrance of the interpretation center, there's a bust of dietary pandas. And dietary pandas for me is very important, especially when you talk about Gadchiroli. Because dietary pandas was the brother-in-law of Dalhousie. He was also the first Director General of Forests in India. And he introduced something called scientific forestry. And what is the idea of scientific forestry? Because in Germany, etc., the number of tree species are not much. So they would identify a few which are commercially viable. And they'll manage the forest to harvest that. When you come to India, the kind of diversity which is there in forests. And so many forests, even in the south, if you go to Topsfield, there are places which have been converted into monocultures of teak. Similarly, if you go to Gadchiroli, a lot of the forests of Gadchiroli have been worked on by the British since the 1880s. And they planted a lot of timber species. Teak is one, there are a lot of other timber species. So what is the problem? For a lot of tribals in Gadchiroli, the trees don't yield anything of value in terms of fruits, or it also has affected a lot of animal, bird population. So when a lot of the things they could collect and they could use is replaced by commercially viable trees. So a lot of them in terms of, take to hunting of, because there's no other way of sustenance. So they take to hunting animals. And this story is important because when we come to Prakash Shanti, I'll talk about it. But Chandrapur in terms of coal, and also near Chandrapur, in Chandrapur, there is this place called Ballarsha. It's also called Ballarpur. It has, I think, Asia's second or third largest paper manufacturing unit. Because Gadchiroli and Gondia and all have some of the biggest clumps of bamboo. And therefore so it is a feedstock for that. It's a huge factory, paper factory, and find trucks and trucks of taking bamboo into the factory. Gadchiroli was separated from Chandrapur, I think fairly recent, 1982, much later. I don't remember the exact date. It was separated as a separate district. And if you're talking about Gadchiroli, what's important to understand is that northern part of Gadchiroli. So if you go to Gadchiroli town, north of Gadchiroli, there are towns like Armori. Okay, so Armori, these talukas are as well off as some of the talukas in Western Maharashtra, because a lot of these areas, there's a lot of rice being grown. And if you go to Gondia, Gondia has a concentration of about 250 rice mills. So a lot of us, when we're talking about Gadchiroli or Gondia, we just tend to talk about them as tribal districts or tribal areas. But the northern part of it, you will see a lot of businesses, of course, rice fields and a lot of that. And if you go to Gadchiroli, and about 25 kilometers from Gadchiroli, you must visit the hospital which is established by Abhay and Rani Bang. And those of you not familiar, please, after the session, Google search SEARCH. They're doing amazing. I mean, some of the program and the research of the search initiative became the foundation for the Asha Health Workers Program. And you must visit the hospital which they built, because when Abhay and Rani Bang went to there to do medical work, they said that before we start medical work, we must first listen to what the tribals have to say. And there are 2 or 3 very interesting insights. One of the insights is a lot of tribals would be scared of going to hospitals because most hospitals, as it's come from Western tradition, most of the linen, the clothes, all are white. For many of the tribals, white is the color of the cloth that covers the body when you're dead. And therefore, they thought if you go into the hospital, your body will not. That was one assumption they had. The second problem for them was when they went to a hospital. Most hospitals, except for visiting hours, do not allow visitors to stay or spend time. So a lot of tribals would just run away in a serious condition because the loneliness for them was far more difficult to handle than the illness. And the third thing was a lot of people find these hospitals intimidating because when you go to a hospital, if you have to find where the X-ray room is or where the sonography, you could get lost. Try going to any of the hospital to find out where the different departments are. And they would find that intimidating. So if you go to this particular hospital, at the entrance, there is a small temple to the local deity. And if you go to the main hospital, it's built like the center of a village. So there is a courtyard around which all the departments are there. And next to that, they have small rooms which they have built with a small kitchen. So family of the patients can stay there, cook their own food, spend time with the patient during the day. So, therefore, if you look at the structure of the hospital, it's interesting. And 1 year, we were fortunate to be able to get an appointment with Dabai Bam. And such he said he can spend an hour. He spent nearly 2.5 hours. And many of the students still remember the kind of conversation because he started by asking, what is it that you want to do with your life? And very interesting conversation and things like that. So Gadchiroli has a lot of things which is important for us. The other place in Gadchiroli you must visit, but you must take the appointment, is a village called Meendaleka. Okay. It's a small village which is not very far from Gadchiroli town. And the Meendaleka is very important because this village took the forest department to the Supreme Court. Because if you look at forest, all forests, the timber belongs to the forest department. And the question is, the forest department said that bamboo is timber. And bamboo is timber, then only the forest department can collect it. So the villagers in this place, Meendaleka, led by this very, really remarkable man called Devaji Tofa. They did a lot of research and they made an argument that bamboo is grass. So how can it be timber? And therefore, tribals could, especially in villages around that, the tribals could harvest it. And for those of you in the group, there are 2 important legislation which you must understand. One is called PISA, the Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas, 1997, which gave the Gram Sabha a lot of control over forest resources, minus for produce. And a lot of villages in Gadchiroli are able to earn about 1 crore every 2 or 3 years. And the women of the village, take care of it. They know how to harvest, prune. So the output is much more. And if you go to the last time I went was 2009 March. Before that, there's a nice banner outside the Gram Sabha building. And the banner says, Mumbai, Delhi, Hamara Sarkar, Idhar Hami Sarkar. Because the Gram Sabha is the final authority in the Gram Panchayat. And it's very interesting to see, if you go to the, very often when I've gone, I've seen women sitting in the Gram Sabha office or place, they're discussing issues. Some of them they have a small computer which they work on. And also, if you go to the village in terms of like Devaji Tofa saying, every year there is some damage to the to the fields by animals from the forest, wild boar and whatever. So they say that that is their share. We are encroaching into the forest and taking a lot of resources from the forest. So if you're going to take resources from the forest, there was also animals to take some resources from what we're doing with the land we have cleared. Now, which is a very interesting insight. I mean, that kind of an insight I never heard of. So meeting these two individuals was really remarkable. And then, of course, if you go, if you go south of Gadchiroli, if you go further south, a lot of the village names have Telugu names. Because in Telugu, Palli means town, village, okay, locality. So if you go south, you will find places like Allapalli, Yettapalli, okay, which is, remarkable. And also there's one forest patch called Glory of Allapalli. It's something which has been developed from the British times that they've tried. But most of the species are what we say timber species, because forest must have a lot of fruit going and other, because that's how it sustains a diverse range of lives. Okay. So if you go further down, you come to this place where the Lok Biradari is the organization which runs the hospital and the school. And 1 year we also had a chance to visit, if you go to Gadchiroli town, there is anti-Naxal operations in Gadchiroli. And when we went there, the police had developed a very interesting dictionary. That is, the language in most of Gadchiroli is Madhyagon. So their Madhyagon words and their translation in English, Hindi, and Marathi. I requested them for a copy. They said you have to get permission from headquarters. So it didn't happen. Also, it's a very interesting thing, because the one part of the Naxal operation, they're also trying to win the trust of the local community. So they're learning the language, helping them. And in the case, recently in international politics, I was studying about something called the human terrain system, with using anthropologists to work among communities to help soldiers understand local communities better. Which I thought it's a very interesting system. I think there is an Australian political scientist, Michael Derrain, I think his name is. He's done a documentary on human terrain system. Please watch that. But I thought in terms of the Naxal operation, we also believe that, if they also help the tribal communities. And so if you go to Hemalkasa, and you can, you can meet Prakash Amte. Prakash Amte also has a small collection of animals which he calls Amte's Ark. So they have leopards, sloth bears, porcupines, snakes, deer, etc. They are in very bad shape. His argument is if these are left in the forest, the tribals will eat them. And that kind of an argument completely unacceptable, because tribal communities have lived with these with animals for centuries. And there are other tribal communities where they don't kill. There may be some in terms of where they are, but to kind of to say that, and also because he is well connected, the forest department also doesn't say anything. It's against the Wildlife Act to have your own private zoo, and it's also I frankly felt it was a terrible zoo, but that's one reality. And if you go further down from to the southernmost part of Gadchiroli. There's a town called Suruncha. Later on, when you look at the map, Suruncha is at the southernmost tip of Gadchiroli district. And Suruncha is a place where there is the confluence of, I think, Amravati and Godavari. And also what is very interesting is that even if you look at the biggest river in Vidarbha is the Wainganga River. The Wainganga River also joins the Godavari. As for the Godavari, it's a massive river as it goes through Telangana into Andhra, because some of the big rivers join them. So if you go to Suruncha, and if you go there, 40% of the people in Suruncha town, it's a small town. You can't stay there. Small town, 40% of Telugu speaking. And there is one temple which is a site of an important pilgrimage at the site of at the place of that confluence of Amravati and Godavari. Okay. So I said when I was doing Western Maharashtra, Godavari is the only river which you encounter, in Western Maharashtra, in Marathwada, and in Vidarbha. So therefore, that in Maharashtra, that's my favorite river. Also because it's the second longest river in India. So Gadchiroli, if you look at Gadchiroli again, location in the southern part of Gadchiroli, Telangana. In the eastern part of Gadchiroli, it is Chhattisgarh. So many people talk about it as north and east part of it. It is as what is called the Red Corridor. So Telangana has been one of the traditional sites of the Naxal movement from the 1960s. And if you go to Gadchiroli, you do find that that a lot of the words, like if you look at like what we call Shaka here for branches, there a group is called a Dalam. Dalam is a Telugu word. And one very interesting thing in terms of Gadchiroli is if you travel to Gadchiroli town, the roads are, the district right up to the southernmost part, the roads are fantastic. Gadchiroli is a very backward area. There are hardly any primary health centers, but the roads are very good. And one person who worked in Gadchiroli gave me a very interesting reason. He says the roads have to be good because in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of police vehicles were blown up by these landmines. And landmines, once the vehicle passes over a landmine, it takes about a few seconds to trigger. So if you're traveling at 80 kilometers, by the time it explodes, your vehicle is gone over it. I think when I was going in, I think 2000 something so somebody said in terms of, please, nobody will give you a lift if you ask for a lift. And most people will, drive very fast because in case there are explosive devices. So, of course, the Naxalism in many parts of, like Bhandara, has come down completely. Gondia, it has come down. Parts of Gadchiroli it still has. So I remember talking to one collector, I forget, I think his name was Vishnu Gopal, I don't remember, in Nagpur once when we met him with students. He says, I really appreciate the work of Abhay Bang and Prakash Ampe, especially Prakash Ampe, because they've been living in inhospitable terrain, offering education, offering medical help. And the kind of institution they built is very good. He says that for a lot of people in India, he says, if you offer them education and you offer them medical help, he said, you're gods. But he said the real problem in Gadchiroli is that we have to provide livelihood. He said that's where the system is failing. And that's very true, because for a lot of tribals, the biggest issue is livelihoods. Forests have changed, the control of forests have changed. And therefore, there is a struggle for them. So therefore, if you want to visit these places, it's good to talk to these people. Again, in Gadchiroli now, they have found a lot of bauxite and other reserves. And there's a lot of struggle because many of the Gram Sabhas are now actively trying to manage the forest so that to generate revenue. And big blocks of Gadchiroli districts are now being given to industrial groups. And there's going to be, and I mean, there is some resistance in Gadchiroli itself. So Gadchiroli district is, is something which, for me, I mean, the town and the place, great learning experience. And even for students who come with us, they always felt that in terms of the experience. In 2019, Devaji Tofa sat and spoke to our students for nearly 2.5 hours. Initially, he said, I can only give you 40 minutes. But he said, a lot of their education is so far removed from reality. So from there, we will move on to Gondia and Bhandara. My first visit to Bhandara, to a forest was Nagzira, and this was in 1993, and then I went back to it in 2017 or 18, and after, I think 2018, 25 years afterwards. In 1993, when I was gone, there was a village called Sakoli. It's a single road village. There's nothing there. Today, if you go to Sakoli, it's a bustling town. It's a town. It's not a village anymore. And Nagzira itself has about now 5 or 6, 7 resorts. Those days, there was only one forest dormitory and forest guest house with no electricity. Even now, that place, the guest house doesn't have electricity. And when we were going, they said that there were no regular transport. So we had a bus which dropped us, and they said they'll come back after 6 days and take us back. So we had a problem, and on Monday, the students were taken on a long trek. And there was one student, because we asked students to wear earth colors, they were wearing camouflage. So police party met us in the forest and said that next time you wear such a thing, we may first shoot you and then ask questions. Because this is the dress of the thing. At that time, there was so much of fear. And an SP I met in Gadchiroli, he said that in some ways what the state should be doing, and Naxals are doing, because they are forcing the contract to give the tribals better remuneration. And if you go to Gondia, especially Gondia, of course, there is this politician called Praful Patel. He's called the BD King. His family controls about 80% of BD production in Gondia. And it will be shocking to know the kind of remuneration they give for people. So therefore, that's a, it's something which, you can't imagine. At one time, for collecting 100 leaves, they used to get 10 paise. Imagine if you have to earn, at least 100 rupees a day, which is, I mean, the minimum wage is about 240. So most of the tribals get so little in terms of for the kind of work they do. So Tendupatta, bamboo, these are very important, minor forest producers. And Gondia, I said, is also seen as a major producer of rice in the region. And of course, Vidarbha region has a large number of, now Nagzira and Navegaon have been connected together to become one tiger reserve. Also, if you go into towards Madhya Pradesh from Nagpur, if you come to Pench, part of Pench forest is in Maharashtra, part is in Madhya Pradesh. And within the Pench National Park, there's a large reservoir. Until the 1990s, a lot of local communities used to fish. And, and suddenly they said again, the Supreme Court said inside a national park, you can't have any kind of commercial activity. And therefore, the local communities now, fish is such an important source of protein, cheap source of protein for local communities. And that has been stopped. And also there's something called the 1980 Forest Conservation Act. In that it says for any non-forest activity, you need to get the permission of the central government. So if you go into the villages in Amravati, in Meendaleka Tiger, most of the villages don't have roads, they don't have electricity. They are small solar which are not serviced because they are so remote. So Forest Department will not allow it, but if you see in terms of the amount of forest being cleared for other kinds of purposes. Similarly, if you look at Ballarpur, at one time bamboo was sold at 250, 2 rupees or 3 rupees 50 paisa for the paper mill. Okay. And tribals had to pay about 200, 300 because those were commercial rates. So if you look at the kind of policies we have, our definition of development is not really in that sense inclusive. And if you look at now Vidarbha has a large number of thermal power plants. What's the problem with thermal power plants? Thermal power plants are also, they are what is called, they are guzzlers of water. They need a lot of water because the kind of heat, when you burn coal, the amount of heat, it is, the steam is generated, which runs the turbine. And the heat also, it could explode. So therefore, you need a lot of water for cooling and for generation of steam. And if you look at Vidarbha, Vidarbha has one of the, poorest network of dams. And one major dam project in Vidarbha is called the Goshiku Dam. That dam is such a, it's a laugh for me because it started somewhere in the 1980s. The project has been going on. The initial cost was some 200 crores. Now the cost has escalated to about 26,000 crores. And the project is not complete. And if you look at Article 371 of the Indian Constitution, it talks about setting up of development boards, one of the provisions, especially for areas like Vidarbha and Saurashtra. Development board for Vidarbha was set up in 1994. So you're talking about 44 years after it was promised. And a lot of the projects which have been planned have not taken off. And when I say Vidarbha, in 1985, there was an economist called Dandekar. And there was a Dandekar committee report which looked at development process in Maharashtra. And it found that the highest backlog of development was in Vidarbha. So fund allocation in terms of, a lot of it is what should be spent is not being spent. So Vidarbha again, in terms of, as I said, there is a lot of interesting history. A lot of, I talked about Wardha, I talked about even Buldhana, even Nagpur city, okay, where there's a 0 point, what is the other thing I want to say? So, one can have so much which can really, I talk about the fort called Sita Baldi. It's a very small fort. But if it can be developed as a tool of attraction, because there's so much of history to it. I think there are tombs of some of the Tipu Sultan's sons inside the fort. Because after Tipu Sultan was killed, his family was, dispersed. One part of his family was taken to Calcutta. Part of it was, I think, detained in Sita Baldi. So, Vidarbha as a place in terms of the districts is important. We talk about Yavatmal. Yavatmal is the district from which the longest serving chief minister of Maharashtra, Vasantram Naik, came from. And Yavatmal is also the place where there is in Western Vidarbha the highest number of farmer suicides taking place. And one of the reasons is in terms of the fact that the cotton output has increased because of BT cotton, Bacillus thuringiensis. So therefore, but it also needs a lot of fertilizer, needs a lot of water. And Vidarbha doesn't really have sufficient water. But Vidarbha is also a place where the government department, they are giving a lot of money for these greenhouses to grow flowers, various kinds of things. And there are some farmers, who are. There's one farmer we met who had 35 acres and he was earning 1 crore because he's doing a lot of drip irrigation, all kinds of practices. And his entire farming system was completely controlled by the computers, water, fertilizer, and it was also a link to his phone. So the alarm would ring, so you could check whether the people on the farm were making sure that all that was happening. So there are a lot of interest in that. And if you talk about Nagpur at one time, it was called, even now it's called Orange City. But if you go to Nagpur, a lot of the Nagpur district, a lot of the orange orchards have wilted. There has been disease. They're also affected by erratic monsoon. Sometimes if you go to Nagpur, some of the oranges you get are not from Nagpur. They are from elsewhere. But of course, Nagpur is the only place I've tasted orange barfi, which is extremely tasty, which is made from orange pulp. So, in terms of agriculture, if you look at chili production, soybean production, Nagpur is among the highest producers of some of that in Maharashtra and in India. And if you go to because for a long time it was a part of the Nizam of Hyderabad. If you go to Vidarbha, a lot of people can speak Hindi as fluently as Marathi. Rest of Maharashtra, a lot of local community are not very comfortable, and the Hindi they speak has such an interesting accent. It sounds like the Hindi they speak in Hyderabad. I found this in Amravati. I found this in Nagpur. Okay, which also is about the kind of influence of the fact that it was a part of the Nizam of Hyderabad, and that culture, kind of culture influence which has lasted. And also, if before it became a part of Maharashtra, it was as a part of Madhya Bharat, most of Vidarbha. And it was the Nagpur Pact of 1953, where it was promised that that Vidarbha would get a lot of benefits, and that's why the winter session is in Nagpur. There's the second bench of the Bombay High Court. But I remember in 1993 there was they said they would have one of the largest IT parks in India, in Asia. Yeah. You go there, it's not taken off. I'll talk about 94. Where Nagpur also, because it's central to India, was supposed to develop as a major logistic hub for air freight and things like that. That project is also not really taken care of. So one of the problems with Vidarbha in terms of sheer economic neglect. A lot of time, every prime minister who comes, who goes, would announce packages. How much of it would really reach the people of Vidarbha is something one doesn't. And also when you talk about the problem with a lot of these sanctuaries and whatever, the local communities only work as menial staff and things like that because they're all owned by people from outside. If you go to wildlife in Kerala, a lot of the many of the, at least in Perambikul and other places, many of the guest houses are run by them. All the trail leaders are local tribal people. One doesn't see that kind of thing. Of course, they will work as cooks and whatever else, or as housekeeping in these resorts. So, and also what has happened is in September 2020, a lot of, there were severe floods, because of the lockdown, etc. We, in the rest of Maharashtra, we didn't really know about it. Okay. Nagpur, Chandrapur, Gondia, Gadchiroli, many parts were severely flooded. And the question which is being asked is whether the kind of irrigation system dams you're building, and the kind of development doing, is it really helping control floods, or it is increasing floods? Because a lot of the catchment area is being denuded. So forests catchment, forests slow down water flows. A lot of that, which is the regular function, that possibly is getting affected severely. So I think that is all I have to say about Vidarbha. If there are any questions on Vidarbha, you can ask. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mention. It was Nagpur is a place where Dr. Ambedkar converted to Buddhism. And if you go to their site, it's interesting in terms of, it's also see Ambedkar's understanding of Buddhism. A lot of people feel it's in variance with the traditional interpretation of Buddhism. Because there is a large plaque there which talks about that. That's important. Thank you for that intervention, because yes, that's it's a very important site for a lot of the Ambedkar movement. But even in Vidarbha, which if you see, there was a lot of this conversation whether in terms of should people convert. And some of the Dalit leaders in Vidarbha felt maybe it's better to be within Hinduism and fight. And of course, Vidarbha has a lot of significant Dalit movements. Dalit activism. Yeah. Of course, also the headquarters of the RSS.
There is a question by Dhaneshri. What could be done to foster development in Vidarbha region?
One is in terms of, if you look at the first thing is, when you talk about development, often development is a function of what we call patronage distribution. Distribution of favors to support groups. If you look at a lot of the politicians who have, if you look at the cabinet ministers, even the current government, a lot of them are not really from Vidarbha. And therefore, even if you say that should be development, funds have to be released. And the finance minister is always talking about financial crunch, and therefore a lot of money is not released. Second, it has to be a lot to do with, foster is community-led development. And if you go to 0 Point, next to 0 Point, there is also a memorial to people who died in a stampede of a tribal community called Gowari Gonds, who wanted ST status because they not got that. But the problem is in terms of, as I said, different areas of Vidarbha are doing different things. So if you have to foster development, improve infrastructure, agriculture, the irrigation has to improve drastically so that, the stress on agriculture is reduced. You have to ensure there is sufficient investment, incentive for people to invest in different parts. Because at the moment, a lot of the industries are active. So there are mining and other things. They're not really in terms of major investments. And even if you look at in terms of some of the power plants, a lot, if you look at, there is one Adani power plant, the coal from it comes from Australia, because it's supposed to be more efficient in burning. It's also interesting that, in terms of one of the first sites which Jamshedji Tata looked at for setting up a steel plant was Wardha. But you also got the coal from Wardha examined. It was not of high quality. And also the government in the central provinces not very helpful in helping set up. There was one. So therefore, petty distribution is that politician ministers from there will have to get funds. If you go to Wardha, there is a steel plant. And that steel plant happened because of one person from there called Vasant Sate. See, the other thing, of course, is to provide incentives like, Aurangabad has done. Encourage, because in terms of, connectivity, Vidarbha is in the center, that if from Delhi, if you want to go to Tamil Nadu, you have to pass through Vidarbha. From west to east, one of the most important
drafting. It's like you're sending it as draft, but it's written well.
Hello? So, to foster development, multiple things have to be done. And one will be, of course, as I said, can you provide better infrastructure? Can you make sure the projects are finished on time? Data accountability. And industries also must want to invest. So much of the investment development takes place around the Mumbai, Pune, Thane, that region still. Yeah. It's very interesting. If you look at Vidarbha, sorry if anybody has a question. The second airport in Vidarbha was in Gondia after Nagpur. Also because, I always wondered how come. We say that a lot of Vidarbha is underdeveloped, that part, Gondia, Bhandara. But as I said, Gondia itself, in terms of rice mills, in terms of the kind of mineral wealth which is there, it became the site for the second airport. Places like Amravati still don't have regular flights. There is a rudimentary airport for small flights, but it's again, if you look at such a large region, the air connectivity is still from Nagpur. Any other questions?
You may unmute yourself and ask the question directly. Any other question?
In fact, if any of y'all want to give any feedback, want to say anything, the floor is open for y'all.
Yeah, see the Mihan project also, it is, I think it's a kind of a stillborn project because it has a lot of potential, but in terms of the pace at which it goes, is something which is leaves much to be desired. Also, if you look at one of the first cooperatives in Nagpur was the Noga Orange Growers Association. That also is, it went bankrupt. Some politicians like Gadchiroli, etc., they have sugar cooperatives in, I think, in Wardha, Yavatmal. Also in terms, see, if you look at the Nagpur, if you look at Nagpur, Nagpur is one of the smart cities. And also Nagpur metro project is going at a great pace. But also a lot of people ask whether a city like Nagpur really needed was metro priority. And to make the metro possible to create space, earlier there used to be a series of flyovers which would go right up to the airport. A lot of this had to be dismantled to create space for the metro project. So when you say smart city project is only looking at some part of Nagpur. Most parts of Nagpur will possibly not be touched. And if you go to, one interesting lesson I learned if you're going to Vidarbha with students, and if you don't go around the time of Holi, because it's a 3 or 4 day holiday, and almost everything can be shut, including hotels, restaurants. But in Nagpur, there was one area which was mostly the area where the Muslim community is. So there we could find a hotel, we could find restaurants, everything open. But the rest of Nagpur was completely shut for 2 or 3 days. So they said that do not come here around Holi. Once we went to Anandvan around Mahashivratri, they also said 3 days, there's nothing which is. So you have to be, when you're traveling, you have to be careful in terms of the dates you choose. Yeah. Any other questions? No, my only request is, for those of you who are still in the group, is, you need to travel and discover for yourselves. There are so many, it's like parts like yesterday when I was doing our Marathwada, in districts like, Usmanabad, Beed. It is, they are fascinating spaces. But our tourism is so focused on a few spots which are extremely popular. And most of our forts, if properly, developed, with information, can be such amazing tourist sites. Maharashtra has the most interesting range of forts. If you can only make that as a part of the popular narrative for interesting places to visit. Vijayadurga and Sindhudurga are such important stories. So if you go to Malvan, around Malvan, there is a Savantwadi is there, which has a palace. There's Ganjifa, there is Amboli, there is, in that itself, there is a, like when you go to North, they have this whole, what is called the Golden Circuit, Taj, Jaipur, and sanctuaries around. And also, of course, the Indian Railway started something called the Deccan Odyssey, like the Palace on Wheels. But it was not viable. Karnataka did a better job of, I think, using a train. It's called Golden something.
Any more questions? Anyone would like to give some feedback, though we have a feedback form, but anyone wants to say anything about the series?
Sir, would you recommend any tourist a spot which no one knows well about?
No, see, I said, most of the places I mentioned, like yesterday I talked about Teher, I talked about Karosa Caves, those are all nobody knows about. Today also when I talked about Singhed Raja, nobody knows about it. I mean, don't know many people. And other forts around, in Buldhana itself. Of course, one place I forgot I should have mentioned is Lunar Lake. And if you walk around the periphery of Lunar, there's so many ancient temples. 8th century, 10th century, 11th century. If those temples are restored and they could not, they're all amazing temples. There's a question if somebody can read. So let me just finish. So the Lunar again, which is in Buldhana, is closer from Jalna at 60 kilometers. There is a nice NTDC property just above the Lunar Lake. You can spend a day or two, and the location is very, very good. Because MTDC is not very helpful in a lot of things. Yeah, there was a question. Can somebody read the question?
Can I interrupt, Sudhakar?
Yeah.
This is Bispi Balaporia. I just want to tell you that it's just amazing the number of places you've been to, visited, seen, and I have just discovered so much about Maharashtra, which I was very ignorant about. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. But there was one question. Can somebody read the question?
Yeah, I'll read it out. Sir, this is kind of a silly question, but being a travel enthusiast, I want to know what all should one keep in mind while visiting different localities or villages in Maharashtra in a way that respect and decorum is maintained, and so that we don't violate the privacy of the locals through the journey.
See, this is a very important question, because a lot of times in terms of a lot of people who come as tourists, in terms of the way we take photographs, often not seeking permission for a lot of places. Also, it's also good to see if you can find a local contact. In terms of to understand the place, what are the kind of things which always, so even if there is this very famous trekking route called Rajmachi, so a lot of people go and they often become a nuisance. But if you can have contact with some local, now most of these places around are having homestays, and some of them are very, very comfortable. So therefore that is in terms of one. Second is in terms of if one is able to listen more, give them time to become comfortable to talk. I think that's the best way to really experience a local place. Of course, in a lot of smaller towns, as I said, like Usmanabad, Beed and all, in terms of there is not enough comfortable hotels and places to stay. So if you use to a certain level of comfort, then it is something which is going to be difficult. And unfortunately, the way we are looking at tourism is a lot of tourism is becoming only affordable for the people who have a lot of money. Like if I want to go to a national park, earlier I could take a 40 rupees ticket and walk through or do something. Now, a single jeep ride can cost me anywhere. If I'm a family, it can cost about 5,000-6,000 plus the resort plus other charges. So it's really unaffordable. So therefore, we need to make. So if that people have to figure out. But normal things in terms of listening more, having local contacts, those are the kind of things which I think have helped. Also, if all of us can make sure that we don't carry disposables. Drinking water, because a lot of these smaller places don't have any way to dispose plastic bottles. So those are the kind of things I think which we can keep in mind. Yeah.
Madhu, would you like to say something about the certificate course that we will be starting tomorrow?
Just 1 minute. Just give me a minute, please.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Like if you go to Alibag, okay, if you can find, even if the Asiatic can find, the descendants of the Angles live in Alibag and some other places. So they would be such a important. They have also a lot of important family heirlooms. When I first went to Alibag, I was shocked in terms of the fact that Kanujan's statue next to it, there was a garbage dump at that time. It was not really understood. So maybe if a lot of people who are connected to this kind of a thing, if one can have networks with them. And in terms of to make sure that, we are able to understand and maybe make it, where they also become stakeholders, where that will also help them keep the place better. Yeah. So I finished now.
Thank you, Sudhakar. So participants, this was, you can say, the prelude to our series, a series on Maharashtra, and I'm sure, I think it was a wonderful way to begin the series. If you are interested in joining the paid series, there is still time. The poster as well as the link are available on the group. And tomorrow's lecture again is a free lecture. It's by it's on Maharashtra, and it is by Dr. Arvind Ganachari, an erudite scholar. So you're all welcome to join that lecture as well, and that means you still get one more day for participating in the series. So now I hand over to Shahnaz Nalwala, the chairperson of Mumbai Research Centre.
Yeah, just 1 minute.
Yeah.
Dr. Ganachari has written the only English biography of Agarkar. Because there is so little material on Agarkar in English. There's a lot available in Marathi. And Dr. Ganachari has written quite a detailed biography. Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt anymore. I'll stop. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Sudhakar, for this very, very amazing series that you gave us. 4 days were a real sort of a journey into every aspect of Maharashtra. Maybe we should have named the series differently rather than maps, a journey into Maharashtra may have been more apt. And thank you once again. And I think I just want the people around to know that if you were a Wilson College student, you would have had the chance to visit the length and breadth of India, because with Sudhakar, our students have traveled to almost every place in India, you know, whether it's Northeast and Ladakh and Kashmir and Lakshadweep or wherever it is. So I think, you know, that is one strong point about Sudhakar, is that along with his excellent teaching, he takes his students out into the open and gives them a wonderful exposure. Thank you so much, Sudhakar.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, participants. Thank you for joining in for this